So if I were to try and distill our conversation to this point down, it's that just through everything, through all of the factors of life and reality, so many of us have blinders on of what we quote unquote need to do. And that is essentially driving us closer and closer to the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
The solution is to bring it from me to we.
Mm-hmm.
But what can individuals and marketers in particular, these are our people here at OnScope, what can marketers in particular on an individual level lead with we in a world that seems to reward greed and exploitation?
You know, it's a really powerful question. And firstly, we have to assume our personal responsibility in that. There's no cavalry coming.
Mm-hmm.
We are the ones we're waiting for, as they say. And you mentioned the cliff. Here's how I characterize it, because it's positive. We are hurtling towards a cliff. This is my oversimplification. As a species on this planet, and we're in this car and everyone's arguing over what song should be on the radio, but we're going straight towards the cliff. And suddenly we've noticed that it's not going to end well. And we grab the wheel and we start to throw the wheel. Now, the first 15 degrees of that 90-degree turn are really hard because the G-forces want to pull you back and just drive you over the cliff. But the second 15-degree turn of that turn, it gets a little bit easier. And more people are holding onto that wheel and turning it. The third 15-degree turn, it gets easier and it starts to get self-evident. It becomes common practice. We are in the first 15 degrees of the turn, where everything wants to force us back and take us over the cliff. But the more hands on the wheel, the easier it will get, and soon it will be self-evident to better serve each other on the planet. That's why I see it in a positive sense. Then, in terms of, what marketers can do, we need to recognize the consequences of the current mindset. As I said, if we try and solve today's problems with the mindset that created them, we're not going to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And to that end, we need to recognize that we don't need to learn something new. We've got to remember what we forgot, which is our innate connection to each other as human beings and the planet we live on.
Yes.
It's hardwired into us chemically, spiritually. It is something that we feel that connection to each other. You feel it every time you hug your child, or you go for a walk in nature and say, God, I feel better.
Yep.
We know this to be true, physiologically and in every other sense. So with that in mind, we need to have this new mindset. And as someone who was an ad guy, I worked at Saatchi and Ogilvy and Wieden and Kennedy and all these places around the world. I came away from that experience after 18 years as an ad guy going, I feel like we're headed in the wrong direction. And when the global economic meltdown happened in 2008, I thought, what is the root of the problem here? And I said, well, it's a me first mentality where, winner takes all. That was really at the root of all of, a lot of the fallout around the world at the time in 2007, 2008. So what's the tonic to that? Well, it's a we first mentality. And that means looking at the collective, getting the greatest number of stakeholders involved to create the greatest collective benefit. Not so you get a ribbon and you save the future and you're an activist, but because when the whole can thrive, the parts within it can actually prosper.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't happen any other way. So what can a marketer do? They can look at the opportunity to work with their partner brands and say, what is the foundational purpose of that company? And there's been a lot of talk around that, but this is not some performative exercise. It is, what is the purpose of the company as it manifests in their supply chain, in how they treat their employees, what products they make, how they go to market, what stories they tell, how they engage their consumer base. And then once you've done that, pull that through the culture of the company so that it is true in terms of the lived experience of your employees. Then see your consumer base or your customer base, if you're B2B, as co-creators of the impact that is an expression of your purpose and mobilize them to that end. And then work with partners out in society to actually scale that. So you pull through from leadership and strategy through to your culture, through to your customers or consumers, and out to partners in society. And, at WeFirst, we do this. We specialize in doing that movement building where you pull that through all stakeholders, because that allows you to, yes, scale your impact, because every one of those stakeholder groups is a force multiplier for the other. But that in turn allows you to scale your growth. And increasingly, companies will be rewarded for the integrity of their intent and action, because as the lived experience of more people around the world gets compromised by a lack of produce that they can't find because of extreme weather, or extreme disruption in their lives because of geopolitical destabilization, and so they're going to reward those companies that recognize that and are doing something positive and additive to their life. So again, this is self-interested. This
Yep.
is expedient. This is realistic. And it's also responsible to the future we all want to create for others, but also ourselves.
Everybody needs to run that back.